Hi.
Hi.
As you know, my name is Curtis Polk, and I am the Employee Ombudsman and Ethics Advisor at the Texas Department of Insurance. And
Hi, I'm Vivian Harvey. I work in human resources as the project manager, and I do a lot of training with Curtis as my other duties as assigned.
duties as assigned, which we all have. And we are glad that you all are here with us because this class, Building a Respectful Workplace, Addressing Sexual Harassment and Discrimination in the Workplace, is the class for this biennium that addresses sexual harassment and discrimination training. And as you know, all state employees have to take a sexual harassment and discrimination course every 2 years, and this is the class for this biennium. Now, if you have taken classes with TDI in previous years, you know that we always call it something different. We just don't say sexual harassment and discrimination. We've talked about respect in the workplace. We've talked about professionalism. This time around, as you see, it's called Building a Respectful Workplace, and hopefully you have your copy of the handout there with you in front of you. And the reason why we called it Building a Respectful Workplace is that we feel that if respect is the umbrella under which everything else falls, then if you are respectful towards your coworkers and colleagues and they're respectful towards you, then that cuts down on interesting aspects of the workplace like sexual harassment, discrimination, retaliation, things like that. So we feel respect is the overall umbrella, right?
Right. Curtis and I develop a course every 2 years, as you know, and we're always challenged because you know the laws. So what we've tried to do in this course is apply the laws. So we'll be asking you some quiz questions so that you can actually do that.
Yes, 3 quizzes. We won't be grading them. You get to grade your own quizzes, so you know you know the answers. And if you don't know the answers, we'll be going over them once you get an opportunity to take the quiz. So it's an open book quiz. So if you can turn pages really quickly, you may find the answers before we even give you the answers.
But they know the answers.
That's right. You already know this stuff. So this is kind of a refresher, which is why the legislature made this mandatory every 2 years. It's a refresher for all of us. And so we're glad that you're watching us right now, and we look forward to it. So you ready to begin?
Yes.
Let's begin.
Yeah, turn the page.
All right. If you would, go over the second page, the page past the overall, the page past the cover page. I'll go over the overall goal and the objectives for our time together. The goal is that participants will be able to distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate workplace conduct and behavior, including sexual harassment, improper sexual conduct, discrimination, and confidentiality of personal health information and sensitive personal information. The training objectives: through course activities and group discussions, participants will be able to recognize scenarios which may become workplace issues, understand the agency's policies and procedures related to sexual harassment, discrimination, sensitive personal information, and protected health information, and to be able to apply federal and state EEO laws as well as general employee behavior to workplace situations. It's just not enough, as you know, to know that there are policies and laws that say don't harass, don't discriminate, don't retaliate. I think we all know that happens, that those laws and policies exist in TDI and DWC as well as OIC. But how do they actually manifest themselves in a day-to-day situation in the workplace? And that's what we will be talking about in this class. Now, if you work for OIC, the Office of Injured Employee Counsel, some of the information that we talk about may be a little bit different, and when it does deviate from TDI, we'll be sure to let you know. But for the most part, since we'll be talking about federal and state laws, everything basically follows along no matter where you may work. Last but not least, the course satisfies the legislative mandate for all state employees to attend training related to protected health information as well as sexual harassment and discrimination training every 2 years. Our bosses, the legislature, made it mandatory way back in 1997 that all state employees have to take a sexual harassment discrimination course every 2 years as a refresher, and if you're brand new to a state agency, you have to take it within the first 30 days of employment. Now, the way that we do the first 30 days of employment is through new employee orientation at TDI. Now, at OIC, you may be watching this in order to satisfy the first 30 days of employment. Or they may even have an orientation tape for you to watch. So that's what we do for both TDI and OIG. But we enjoy creating the class every 2 years, as Vivian stated, because it allows us to be able to put in whatever's happening out in the real world to make sure that we are addressing items in the most timely fashion. So that is what we will be doing. We'll move fast and furiously. Again, the quizzes are an opportunity for you to show exactly what you know already. And speaking of the quizzes, it's time for your first. So if you would, turn over to the very next page and start to answer those 7 questions, and we will go over them once you finish. Okay, you ready for the answers?
How'd you do?
You got them all right, right?
Did you have to cheat?
Never cheat. Now remember, it's not cheating because we're getting ready to go over the answers. So if you don't have the answers in right now, you can write them in as we go through and act like you had them there the whole time.
You're the ethics advisor.
I'm the ethics advisor, but I'm also realistic. So there we go.
Okay.
Question number 1. Is it necessary for you to file a formal complaint to report sexual harassment? The answer is no, it is not. And you find the answer on page 20 of your handout. And by saying the word formal, what I mean is, do you actually have to complete the form that is in HR Forms online in order to have your complaint looked at by management or by me as the employee ombudsman? The answer is no. You can just talk to people. You can contact your manager. The form does not have to be completed. You find that answer on page 20 of your handout. Question number 2. What is the primary way employees learn how to report sexual harassment at the agency? Is it through new employee orientation? Is it through the policy manual? Or C, is it through what we're doing right now? Sexual harassment and discrimination training? The answer is C. To be sure, A and B are ways that you find out about sexual harassment, but primarily it's through C, sexual harassment and discrimination training.
Number 3, in a sexual harassment situation, the harasser can be a coworker, a manager, a contract employee, temporary employee, or a customer. Or D, all of the above. And I know you got this one right. All of the above is the answer. And we're going to talk a little bit more as we go through the sexual harassment course about all of these situations.
Absolutely. Question number 4. What specific type of hostile work environment, sexual harassment, is described in this scenario? A delivery company person who brings packages to TDI repeatedly asks you out on a date, and you have expressed to him that you don't want to date him. Which one on page 4, at the bottom of page 4, would this be? You're correct. It's non-employee sexual harassment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when I get over to that page. The answer is non-employee sexual harassment.
Okay, let's do number 5. In the scenario above, when we were talking about the delivery person, if you're an unpaid intern, what can you do in that sort of situation? Well, page 22 in this workbook will tell you, it's in our personnel manual, that you can report it to your manager just as if you were a paid employee here at the agency. A couple of legislative sessions ago, the legislature added the term intern to being covered under the sexual harassment laws. Mm-hmm. So if you're an unpaid intern or you're a temp employee, like a Goodwill employee, you still have the rights of the employee that's actually employed here. Right. Okay, number 6. What are some consequences of sexual harassment in the workplace? Now, I'm talking big picture here, not just what might happen to individuals that are involved in sexual harassment in the organization, but bigger picture. Let's look at that. What happens whenever you have a situation going on in the workplace? There's lots of gossip. The productivity goes down pretty soon. People aren't very motivated. People may leave the agency because they don't want to work here anymore. Certainly if the situation was big enough that it hit the newspaper, we wouldn't be able to recruit people to come to work here. So there is a decreased morale and less productivity in the workplace when these sorts of things happen. So that's one of the things that we have seen across the nation in the last 18 months, 2 years now. And so we want to spend a little bit more time talking about that as we go into the course later on.
Absolutely. So, how'd you do? Did you get them all right? Did you get them all right after we went through them? No, that's the main thing. As long as you get them all right after we go through them. If you would, turn over to the next page, and I'll go over this page, which, if you have taken classes with us before, this page will seem like a true refresher page, because since the last time we were together, sexual harassment law has not changed. For the law to change, since it's federal law, it would have to work its way up through the Supreme Court, withstand challenges all the way up, and that's how it's changed. And since the last time we were together, that has not occurred. There are still only two specific types of sexual harassment. The first, as you see at the top of the page, is quid pro quo sexual harassment. As you see, it's where employment decisions or expectations are based on an employee's willingness to grant or deny sexual favors. Look at the examples right there. Demanding sexual favors in exchange for a promotion or a raise, disciplining or firing a subordinate who ends a romantic relationship, or changing performance expectations after a subordinate refuses repeated requests for dates. Quid pro quo, Latin term basically meaning this for that, something for something else. If you go out on a date with me, I'll give you that plum job assignment you said you wanted. Or because you didn't go out on a date with me, I'm not going to give you that raise that I had previously said that you were going to get. Quid pro quo, this is the type of sexual harassment they still tend to show in movies and on television because it's more dramatic, it's more titillating. But in today's workplace, we don't see quid pro quo as much as we used to. One reason being what we're doing right now, mandatory training, where both men and women are in the class. They learn what's wrong, what's right, what's illegal, what's legal. So we don't see quid pro quo as much as we used to. But unfortunately, sexual harassment still happens in many workplaces. But today when it happens, it tends to be the second one on that page, hostile work environment sexual harassment. As you see, it's where verbal or nonverbal behavior in the workplace focuses on the sexuality of another person or occurs because of that person's gender. It is unwelcome, unwanted, and or uninvited, and it is severe or pervasive enough to affect that person's work environment. As I mentioned, unfortunately, this is the type of sexual harassment that many workplaces still tend to deal with right now, because most people understand quid pro quo. If an investigation takes place and if that's found to be the case, that person probably will be terminated. But how could telling a joke, how could that be sexual harassment? Or having a picture in your office of someone who may be scantily clad, how could that be sexual harassment? And it could be, because it would fall under hostile work environment. Follow along on the page and you'll see examples of hostile work environment sexual harassment. Right there in the middle of the page, this is where off-color jokes or teasing would come into play. Comments about body parts or sex life, suggestive pictures, posters, calendars, cartoons even. Excessive attention in the form of gifts, telephone calls, love letters, or inappropriate email. Repeated requests for dates, and of course touching, brushes, pats, hugs, shoulder rubs, pinches. All of these could be considered sexual harassment or improper sexual conduct because they would go to either creating or continuing a hostile or intimidating work environment. There are 3 specific types that fall under hostile work environment, and there they are. They're at the bottom of the page. This is where same-sex sexual harassment comes in. And the fact that a man can be found guilty of sexually harassing another man, a woman can be found guilty of sexually harassing another woman, makes no difference about sexual orientation or gender. People harass people. The next one there is non-employee sexual harassment. And if you recall from previous classes, non-employee sexual harassment is if somebody comes into your specific workplace and they may say or do something to you that would be disrespectful, that would cause you to feel uncomfortable. But the reverse is also true. You are someone's non-employee, so you can't go into someone else's workplace and say or do something that would make them feel uncomfortable. Non-employee sexual harassment works both ways. And there, the third one, third-party sexual harassment. Do you recall what this one is? Yeah, this is where you as the third party may hear other people talking or other people showing pictures, and you may find what they are saying, what they are doing to be inappropriate or disrespectful to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are guilty of sexual harassment or improper sexual conduct. It just means that you as the third party have the right to make the complaint. That's what third-party sexual harassment is. Now, it's usually at this point that someone is saying, well, third parties, no one was talking to you. If you're listening in on our conversations, then that's your problem. Well, I understand that, but the law does allow for third parties to make complaints. If you think about it, that's why in schools, teachers, principals, school nurses can make complaints that a child looks to be abused in some way, shape, or form. Third-party reporting. Third-party reporting also, if done in good faith, is what would allow you, if you had a colleague or coworker confide to you that they are being harassed in some way, shape, or form, third-party reporting is what would allow you to report it for them if they feel like they can't or they shouldn't report it. If they think that it would jeopardize their job or something like that, you could report it for them as the third party. So, if done in good faith, third-party reporting really is a good thing. It's just that we get nervous that a whole bunch of third-party people are walking around listening in on our conversations and they're trying to get us in trouble. And during my entire time investigating situations like that, I've never run across that the third party legitimately felt that they needed to report what was going on. The last thing at the very bottom of the page, what's the difference between sexual harassment and improper sexual conduct? If you've listened carefully, you've heard me interchange those terms or use them both. And the reason why I do that is that sexual harassment law is federal law. And, if you know the law, sometimes the law has to fit very neatly in the against the law box. But there are things that happen in workplaces that may not rise to the level of being against federal law. They're still disrespectful. They still need to be addressed by the employer. So by saying improper sexual conduct, it allows me to investigate anything from a level 1 all the way to a level 10 something. And if you view a level 10 as being against federal law, a level 1 or a level 2 something may not be against the law, but still disrespectful behavior that needs to be addressed in the workplace. So that's why I call things improper sexual conduct in addition to sexual harassment law. Any questions about anything like that? Okay. Well, now if you will turn over to the next page, you'll see that Vivian and I, when we created this class, this is something new that we included because we wanted to make sure that employees knew the stages of a complaint and also understood about policy and process. Now, Vivian will talk about the stages of a sexual harassment complaint at TDI, but before she does, I first want to talk about the top of the page. So hopefully you're on page 5, and I'll talk about the policy. Let's answer these questions. As a TDI employee, what is your responsibility in reporting sexual harassment? Now, this would be true for OIC employees as well. And what we like to say is that while it is your choice to report sexual harassment, it's not against the law if you don't do it. We urge you to do it, but if you choose not to as an employee, then we would never know what to investigate if you choose not to. So we strongly urge employees to bring it to the attention of management and to all of the people who you need to report it to in order to get something done. Now, can you report or file a complaint about sexual harassment to your manager? Yes, you can. You can report it to your immediate manager. Can you report sexual harassment to a TDI manager or an OIC manager who is not in your chain of command? Yes, you can. It does not have to be your specific manager, but you can report it to someone who is not in your chain of command. The next question, who else can you report sexual harassment to? Well, depending on where you work, you can report it to a lot of different people. It does not have to be to your specific manager. You can report it to HR or employee relations. You can report it to me as the employee ombudsman at TDI. You can report it to your commissioners. You can report it to the commissioner of DWC, the commissioner of the non-insurance part or the insurance part of TDI, Commissioner Sullivan at the time. You can also report it to people who are in your handbook as people who are folks that you can report it to. I believe in OIC you can report it to your general counsel. So there are different people that you can report sexual harassment and improper sexual conduct to. The next question, as a manager, now previously we were talking about employees, but this question refers to managers. As a manager, if an employee reports sexual harassment to you, what should you do? Yes, you need to report it to your chain of command. You need to do something in order to get that report to the correct people so that an investigation can take place. And that's very important for managers, team leads, and supervisors to know, because you can be held liable if you choose not to. So yes, if you play this all the way out, individual managers, team leads, supervisors can be sued in addition to a workplace. So you have a very major responsibility as a manager, team lead, or supervisor to report sexual harassment or improper sexual conduct in your place of employment. Now, at TDI, how does a complaint work? When you report something, what happens? And Vivian will now talk about the complaint process.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the bottom of page 5 now with the stages of a complaint. So Curtis has already talked about the complaint coming to him, but there are several ways, from the top of the page that it can get to him. So let's say you as an employee have a concern. Maybe it's not a complaint, but you have a concern. You're wondering, is this sexual harassment? Then you can ask several people. You can ask any manager within your organization. You can ask HR, or if you're with OIC, of course, you could talk to employee relations or maybe the general counsel. And if you're with TDI, you can report to either commissioner. Regardless of who you're reporting it to, the report will get to Curtis in order to do the investigation. So that's the next step. So the ombudsman receives a complaint and he actually does the investigation if an investigation needs to be done. Now, once he concludes that investigation, he meets with, for TDI, he meets with HR and for HR's agency attorney. And the reason he does that is he gives them the report and then they make a decision about what needs to be done. Now, what are they looking at? They're looking for consistency, because the HR director and other powers that be here in the agency know what has happened for investigations in the past. If certain circumstances were part of that investigation, then what was the result or what was the solution? So they're going to be looking at how do we handle this consistently within the agency. They're going to report it to the deputy of administrative operations. They'll also report it to the top person, the finding and their recommendation to the top person in the chain of command where the issue arose. Then what happens is HR is going to begin the process of, I'll call it fixing, coming up with a solution and actually fixing the problem. And as part of that, they'll go back to the person who initially reported the situation and check in with them, tell them that the investigation has concluded. And then a step that I think is really important is, within a few weeks, HR is going to circle back around to that situation to make sure it was really fixed. So much of the time you and I will think we've got a problem solved, and then we realize that by solving that problem, something else happened, or that it wasn't really fixed. So that's the final stage of this whole process. If you have some questions about the process, then you could contact the HR director at TDI or Curtis. Either one of them would be able to explain that more. So, you good with that? Okay, then let's turn over to the next page. So, over the last 18 months or 2 years, we have seen I'll call an explosion of sexual harassment complaints in the news. Now, there's lots of discussion, particularly in our classes whenever we cover this information, about how that came to be. And of course, social media is a big piece of that because news travels very fast in social media. But my question here is, why do you think the reports of sexual harassment, assault, or improper sexual conduct have increased dramatically? Okay, so it's social media, but what else has happened? Some people will bring up, well, what about the Me Too movement? Because that has made people feel more comfortable, realize it wasn't just me. I thought I was the victim. Now I realize that other people were treated the same way as I was, and it wasn't just something that I did to cause that about myself. So they feel a whole lot more comfortable now in making complaints. So I think we're seeing a cultural shift in the workplace and may see companies establish more standards, certainly more policies. I'm already seeing the legislature and lots of companies asking, what is our policy? Do employees know what our policy is? How do they know what our policy is? What are we doing to teach them? And do they know who to report to? Maybe they know what the policy is, but do they know who they can report concerns or complaints to? So I'm beginning to read that a lot of organizations, a lot of big companies are beginning to look at teaching, having classes, having some sort of formal methods to address these sorts of complaints. So I think that we're looking at a whole culture change. Now, here at TDI, I think we're ahead of the curve. We've been talking about, I think Curtis and I started teaching in '94 courses having to do with conducting ourselves properly and basically respect in the workplace. And so I feel like we have been doing what we could for a number of years, and therefore, we probably have seen the results of that and having lower numbers of reports of sexual harassment. So I think that that's a good thing. If you have some questions about that, or if you want to continue to have that discussion with me, give me a call. So you want to move into the case studies now?
Let's move to the case studies because, as we mentioned, it's just not enough to talk about laws and policies and procedures. We actually also want to talk about general employee behavior. What happens if something were to happen to you? What can you do? And that's what these 3 case studies are designed to do. So let's start with number 1. Case study number 1, a male coworker stopped by my cubicle today to gossip and complain about work issues. And after a while, he proceeded to flirt and hit on me. He is at least 10 years older than I am. I'm 26, and it was so unprofessional. While he didn't say anything gross or totally sexist, I was still embarrassed and my face turned red. He commented on my blushing, and I couldn't say anything. I didn't know how to respond. I'm angry with myself for not speaking up. I was afraid of his or any man's aggressive reaction if I said something. So, what words or phrases could this employee have used to express her uncomfortableness, and what other actions could she have taken? Now, we've been teaching this class for a while now, and we've heard some very interesting comments about what could she have done. First of all, somebody said, and this is absolutely true, somebody said, well, rather than to just say, well, I need to go down the hall or I have another meeting, say something in order to break the cycle of this person standing in front of you, taking up your time. Somebody said, well, I would just say, look, I got mace in my purse and I ain't afraid to use it. Okay, we would choose not to use that one because that would be another class we'd have to all attend, violence in the workplace. So no MACE questions, okay? No MACE comments. But you could say, look, I'm not comfortable with this, or I do have another meeting to go to, or say something that would allow the cycle of this person taking up your time to be broken. Now, it's usually at this point that somebody says, well, why should it be her responsibility to do that? Shouldn't he know that he's taking up her time? And true enough, someone should know that they're taking up your time, but that's not always the case. That people take our time and they don't realize they're there to gossip, they're there to share, and they're not necessarily concerned with our time. So there are various things that you can say. If you just want to be open and honest about it, you can just say, excuse me, I have something else to do. I'm not really comfortable hearing this. It always goes back to what you're comfortable saying. Some people are comfortable saying, look, I have another meeting to go to, even though they don't have another meeting to go to. Some people are comfortable saying, I need to go down the hall. But some people are very comfortable letting that person know, I'm not comfortable, or I don't want to hear what you're talking about. So again, it just depends on how comfortable you are with this situation. As I am very fond of saying, don't let anybody take from you what you're not willing to let them have. Be it time, money, esteem, whatever it may be. Don't let people take from you what you do not want them to have. So I think this is a very good way to think about this question. Say what you feel comfortable saying, but at the same time, don't let people take from you what you don't want them to have.
You know, in doing this particular question, we've had people say, why does it matter that she's 26? What does that have to do with the scenario? And we had a woman early on when we started teaching this say, well, I can answer that one. You know, I would handle this much different at 46 than I would at 26. Because at 26, I probably hadn't been in the workplace very long. Mm-hmm. I may not have been in this workplace long, but I certainly haven't had very much experience working with individuals in the workplace setting. So how I would handle it at 26 is much different because I get much more comfortable with myself, very much more confident. So I thought that was a good dialogue that we had.
Yeah.
Because it is comfort. You were saying a few minutes ago, it's,
yes.
You know, what do you feel comfortable telling this person?
Mm-hmm. And just like the reporting of sexual harassment is going through an evolution, as individuals, we go through an evolution as well. What we would choose to do years ago is different than what we would choose to do today. Let's look at the next case study. Case study number 2.
Okay, I've got the next one. We're on page 7 now. Let's pretend that I'm a manager here at the organization, the agency, and I supervise 10 people. And in those 10 people, I have 6 men working for me and 4 women. Last week, 2 of the men came to me and told me that a couple of the women make them feel uncomfortable. Go back to that comfort thing. They said that they give them unsolicited touches, hugs, call them honey and sweetie, and they want me to talk to the women and tell them not to do that anymore. Well, my perspective as a manager, maybe not so good perspective, but my perspective as a manager is they should handle it themselves. Rather than me bringing the women in and me talking to them, because that's kind of blows it out of proportion and makes a big deal out of it, I would like for them to stand up for themselves, be assertive, and tell the women that they're uncomfortable, kind of like the situation that we just talked about on the previous page. So if the men come to me and they're looking for a solution and support from me as a manager, but then I in turn say, I want you to go back and tell them this. What do you think about me as a manager? Now, you remember a couple of pages back, what? That I as a manager have a responsibility or a duty to handle a situation. And in fact, I as a manager can be liable. They can sue me in addition to the agency should something go south. So what should I do? I as a manager should handle the situation. Now, I don't want you as a manager handling the situation by bringing all 10 of your employees into a staff meeting and say, okay, we're going to stop calling people honey and sweetie. We're not going to do those sorts of things in this workspace, because what you've just done is you've just talked to everybody instead of the 2 people that you needed to be talking to. So we always have to think about a plan of action and how we're going to handle something, but then you as the manager should be responsible and stand up and do your job.
So if you would turn over to the next page, case study number 3. A couple of months ago, I received a friend request from a coworker on Facebook. I accepted the request. At first, communication was friendly. Work stuff, weekend plans, etc., stuff like that. But recently, the contacts are filled with sexual innuendos. I'm not interested in having that type of relationship with her, but if I unfriend her, she'll find out and get mad. We work together on assignments and are located near one another in the office. I want our relationship to be like it was before. We were friends, but we kept our relationship professional. What can be done to make this situation and the workplace better for both co-workers in the future? Now, here we are in social media. How many of you are actually on Facebook? I see some hands out there. I know. Facebook is interesting and Facebook is good. For the most part, it is. But every now and then, social media finds its way into the workplace. And, this is an interesting situation because one of your coworkers is making suggestions and you aren't comfortable with that. So do you unfriend them? Do you unfriend them so that you don't see their comments anymore? But if you do that, and I'm not totally familiar with Facebook, but can't they say, well, wait a minute, I've been sending you stuff and how come you haven't been responding? And that could create a problem in the workplace. Well, I think in a situation like this, honesty is probably the best policy. And that is just talk to the person. Just let them know, look, I like what we were doing before, but you are mentioning things that I'm uncomfortable with, so please stop. I don't want that type of relationship here with someone in the workplace. I don't want that type of relationship with you. Remember, and I go back to what I said earlier, people will take from us what we allow them to take. Don't allow this person to prompt you to be in a type of relationship that you're not comfortable with. If you need to, report it to your manager, or if you work at TDI, you can definitely report it to me and I'll help you address the issue. But don't put up with something that you really are not comfortable with. So I think that honesty is the best policy here. As is the case with many things in the workplace, even though we say that we should leave our feelings at the front door or at the door and don't bring them into the workplace definitely has feelings. So don't allow your feelings to be manipulated by other people, or don't allow your comfort to be made to feel. Don't allow yourself to be made to feel less than in any way, shape, or form. Speak up or get assistance from your management or from me. I've dealt with issues like this before, and I'm sure I'll continue to. So that's what you can do if this situation were to occur. Any questions? Well, if you have any, we can't hear them right now, so we have some questions for you. It's time for your second quiz. So if you would, turn over to the next page and answer these 5 questions, and we'll go over them once you finish.
We're looking at quiz number 2, the discrimination quiz, because this is kind of a quiz to see what you know, because I'm going to talk to you about discrimination. But since you already know the discrimination laws, you shouldn't have trouble filling out these questions, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And remember, if the answers you have right now are not the correct answers, you can plug in the correct answers as we go through and act like you had them there the whole time.
So I have the first one. List the 7 protected classes covered under the federal and state employment opportunity laws. So which 7 protected classes or categories are covered by the EEOC? I gave you race, national origin, gender, sometimes it's called sex, but the gender and age. What are the three others? One of them is color, and remember, color is different from race, right? Because with color, we're looking at the lightness and darkness of skin even within a race. So color, religion, and disability. That's the newest one. So you have all 7 now, and we're going to speak to those 7 in a few minutes. Now, I know you're wondering, well, I don't see there in this list, I don't see sexual orientation. That's because the federal law doesn't cover it yet, although more than half of the states in the U.S. now have what they call an Employment Non-Discrimination Act. Texas doesn't have one, and the Supreme Court hasn't acted to add sexual orientation to this list. Now, that doesn't mean that some cities, either in their hiring practices or in their housing, don't list and cover sexual orientation as part of the federal laws. And in fact, Curtis would still investigate sexual orientation complaints, just like he would any other, because it's an issue of disrespect, and we want everybody here at the agency to be respectful. So those are your 7 that I will address in a few minutes.
Question number 2. Which law would apply in the following situation? You worked as a purchaser for a company and were terminated because you reported an illegal act. Now, some people would be tempted to say whistleblower. And that's what would happen if you felt that the answer to this question were about to happen to you. Retaliation is the word I'm looking for. Now, the Whistleblower Act, Vivian will discuss that a little bit better in the next few pages, but retaliation is the answer I'm looking for. You were terminated because you reported an illegal act. Retaliation is the answer.
Number 3, which law defines a disabled person as one who has a physical or mental condition that substantially limits one or more major life activities? I know you got the answer to this as the Americans with Disability Act, or it had an amendment back in, a few years ago. We'll look at the date in a minute. So it's now called the Americans with Disability Act as amended, I think. So we know that that's the ADA, but when it talks about one or more major life activity, what is a major life activity? What do you consider every day? You probably don't consider. You just take it for granted. Walking, seeing, hearing, any of the 5 senses, taking care of yourself, those sorts of things are major life activities that are covered under the ADA. You want to take 4?
I'll take 4. Which theory of employment discrimination focuses on whether an individual was treated the same as other employees? Answer to this is on page 14 of your handout. There are 2 theories, and this one is disparate treatment. That is correct. And the word disparate just means different. So different treatment. There's another one on that page, and when Vivian gets to that page, she will delineate the 2. But the answer to this question is disparate impact.
And I have 5. And of all the ones on this page, that's probably the only one that you didn't know how to answer. But which of the following was the top workplace employment charge handled by the EEOC in 2017? And I just recently, April the 12th, got the 2018 numbers. So there are the 7 protected classes are listed there, plus what? The word retaliation, which was covered in question number 2. Remember, retaliation is also covered by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So all 8 are here. But the number 1, the top workplace employment charge that went to EEOC, where people went to that organization and said, I have been discriminated against, they filed for retaliation. Now, retaliation in 2017 was 49% of all the charges that went to EEOC. I just got the numbers for 2018, and it is up 3%, so almost 52% from last year's or from the previous year's numbers. So retaliation is still a big deal in the workplace, and you can understand why. It's because people feel like they've been mistreated, they're not treated fairly, or if they filed a complaint about some other, something else in the workplace, they may feel like they're treated different after they file the complaint than they were before. And that's what we're looking at in retaliation. If you have a concern about retaliation, then Curtis is the one who also investigates retaliation. Any question about those?
I don't have a question, but I have a statement. On question 4, I gave the wrong answer the second time I went through. The answer to question 4 is disparate treatment, not impact. It's disparate treatment. And I just wanted to make sure that I got that out.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about it in a minute.
Yes.
Okay. So you got all 5 of those, and we will turn over and actually start talking about the federal discrimination laws. Curtis mentioned that sexual harassment fits into in a box. It has to fit into a box to be to meet the standards of the law. Discrimination does too, and in fact, it has what I'll call 2 pieces of it in the equation. You have to be able to say, I as an employee receive some negative employment I just lost my thought. I'm sorry. Okay. Some negative employment action. So you were demoted, or you weren't hired in a certain position, you were fired, or you were reclassified, and it was a negative reclassification. So you have received some negative employment action, and you have to prove that it was based upon one of the 7 protected classes. So it is a 2-part equation. I got this negative employment action, and it was based upon my sex, my religion, my national origin, any of those 7 protected classes. So in law, those 2 have to be proved out. Now, what usually happens is what I was talking about a few minutes ago. People just feel like they're disrespected or they're treated unfairly in the workplace, but they'll use the term discrimination, and we understand that. Our family, our friends, our next door neighbors, coworkers use that term. So I wanted to make that distinction so you can educate them or, have a conversation with them about that as they are expressing their unhappiness to you. Okay, so we have a couple of unlawful practices there. An organization demotes an employee after the employee files a discrimination complaint, and we know that that's retaliation. We know that that's against the law. Or let's say a manager promotes a younger IT employee because they believe younger staff are more tech savvy than older staff. So that's age discrimination. So that's a couple of examples there. If you'll turn the page, we're going to talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's kind of like what started this whole discrimination discussion in 1964. So we have race, color, ethnicity, religion, and gender were the first 5 categories, or we'll call them our protected classes. And remember the distinction between race and color we mentioned a few minutes ago. And the term gender was initially called sex. And in fact, the protected category of gender got added to the bill of 1964 the night before the legislature was to debate the bill on the House the next day. Someone added a 5th one, gender, to the list of protected categories because they thought it would help defeat the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. You can look that up in Wikipedia. It's pretty well documented. So I think it's a great story to know that somebody thought it would help defeat the bill by adding the term gender in 1964. But think about where women were and women's places were as far as the workplace was concerned in 1964. And that hasn't been that long ago. Okay, so we still know that it prohibits retaliation, is on the bottom of page 11. And if you will turn over to 12, we'll talk about Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967. How old do you have to be covered under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act? Yeah, that's right. 40 and over. And to many of us, 40 is looking pretty young. This agency, or at least TDI, I don't know about OIC, TDI has a larger group that are over 40 than under 40, like 51% or something. One of the things that I've read recently in research is that Texas Roadhouse has paid out $1.2 million last year in an age discrimination lawsuit because the job applicants said that Texas Roadhouse wouldn't hire older workers for what they call the front of the house positions. Those were the bartenders, the host people that seat you, and the people that are actually servers. So think about that when you eat at Texas Roadhouse. Okay, the next one on the page is the Equal Pay of 1963. Even before 1964, we were having issues with discrimination laws. And women felt like they weren't being paid. Where have you heard this before? Weren't being paid the same as men in the same sort or similar positions. So this has been going on with, particularly in the federal law, since 1963, and during every legislative session and during every political season, you will begin to hear the Equal Pay Act or the equal pay for men and women as part of a discussion in that. Now, on the bottom of 12, we have the Americans with Disability Act, and we covered that a few minutes ago. If you have some questions about that, the Americans with Disability Act or ADA issues for the TDI side of the house are covered by HR, so you can give a call to HR if you feel like you may have a disability. Or with OIC, then you could call Employee Relations if you have a question about that. The next page, we're going to talk about the Texas laws. Now, we've been talking about federal laws. These are the Texas laws. All of the Texas laws for employment discrimination mirror those of the federal laws. They're in the Texas Labor Code, Chapter 21. And one of those Texas laws is the Whistleblower Act. Curtis mentioned a few minutes ago that I was going to talk about the Whistleblower Act. If you'll remember, I've underlined 3 things on page 13. There's 3 things you need to remember about the Whistleblower Act. You are actually, as an employee, you are reporting in good faith. That's the first one. Something that you believe is a violation of law, that's the second thing. It's not just a process or the way you go about doing your work. Then you also need to report it, the third thing, to the appropriate law enforcement authority. You may not know who that is. You may have a peace officer that lives in your community that you may feel comfortable talking to. You can call the state auditor's office and talk to one of their peace officers. We have a number of peace officers working here in this agency that you could talk to if you felt comfortable doing that. If not, you could call the state auditor's office. This particular whistleblower case in Bastrop County was involved with a plaintiff who had worked at the Humane Society, and she felt like the animals weren't being treated humanely. And she reported that complaint to the director. And so the court system said she did not report it to the correct law enforcement entity because her boss was not the law enforcement entity. So you can kind of see that one. But you may not know who the correct law enforcement entity is. So, use your resources here, your agency, or, your neighborhood, whoever your contacts are, to find out who that would be. Because it's going to depend upon the violation, the law that's been broken, whether that's, the tax law or the city law or what laws it is, who you need to go as a law enforcement authority. Any questions about that? Give me a call, okay? So let's turn over to the next page and we'll get into disparate treatment or desperate treatment and disparate impact that Curtis mentioned a few minutes ago. The difference between the two, remember, desperate just means different. I treat you different, that's disparate treatment or desperate treatment. I treat you different as an individual based upon one of those 7 protected classes. Your color, your race, your religion, your sex, any of those 7 protected. Now that one we see in the news all the time. That one's pretty easy for us to understand. The second one is the impact of a policy or process or some sort of action that your organization took affects a whole group of people. So let me give you an example of that, disparate impact, where the impact is different on your group. A few years ago when the economy was in the tank, a lot of companies were downsizing. They may have called it right sizing, whatever they called it. They were typically laying off mid-level management in order to cut the salary dollars. They're going to keep the people at the top. They're going to keep the worker bees, but they were cutting out mid-level management. Well, how old does mid-level management just happen to be, right? 40 and over. So there were a lot of class action lawsuits because the impact affected that age over 40 group different, and it was different from the gender group, the religion group, the race group. So that was a group that was affected in mass. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about disparate impact. The impact of an action or a policy that an organization takes affects a whole group different from the other groups. So now let's talk about a case study on page 15. This is a discrimination case. Came up in South Texas. I haven't used the real names in order to protect the innocent. But let's say that company ABC posted a job for a planner scheduler. Mr. Swanson, not his real name, applied for the job with this company, and he had worked in this position before. He had worked there, he had moved away, he moved back, and when he moved back and the position was vacant, his boss called him and said, "Hey, I hear that you've moved back. Your old job is open. Would you like to apply for it?" And he was like, "Sure." So he did. He applied for it. Well, the hiring manager wanted to hire him back, but the facility director who was over the hiring manager said, "Nah, I really don't want to hire him. I'm looking at the fact that he's 56 and his wife has cancer, and I'm worried about his productivity here because he might have to take care of her." Now, right now you're thinking, how did he know? Or maybe you could kind of guess somebody's over 40, but how did he know that his wife was ill? Well, if you've ever lived in small town Texas, you understand that concept really quickly. But here in this situation, they did not hire Mr. Swanson, who had worked in this job before, but they hired a 35-year-old applicant with no experience in this company. Now, I'm not going to say, having read the case, that he didn't have experience working with the CAD system that this person needed to work with, because he did have some experience, just not this type, this detailed experience. Now, right now you're saying, okay, there were some laws that were broken here. First of all, some of you might think, well, HIPAA laws were an issue to start with. Well, yeah, okay, but what else? What do you see there? Well, pretty quickly you've thought about the age discrimination laws, because he said he's 56, which means he's 40 and over. He's 56. But what about the health of the wife? She's not the applicant. So do the discrimination laws affect him because of her? Well, in fact, they do. Age discrimination has a provision. The Americans with Disability Act has a provision called what they call the association. You were discriminated against based upon your association with someone who had a health condition. You were discriminated against because they didn't hire you because of your association with someone that has a disability. So we haven't talked about that very often. I don't know if we've talked about it at all. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to bring that up because that's something that might happen in the workplace where people might, your family members or your coworkers, or maybe not your coworkers, but your neighbors might apply for a job and feel like they weren't hired based upon the fact that they had a parent that was ill, children that have some sort of a disability. So that's a very real situation. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to cover that case study. Mm-hmm. Did you have any comments about that?
I don't have any comments about that, but it's time for the third quiz.
The last quiz.
The third and final quiz. So if you would turn over to the next page, and we'll treat this one just like we did the previous two. Answer, and we will go over them once you are finished.
I have 5 questions. We're back with quiz number 3. I have the first question. If you have looked on the next page, 17, you've looked at the list of things in the category of sensitive personal information and protected health information. On that list, which you probably already knew about, there are several things that fit into one group or the other. So let's go over the ones that we have here listed with question number 1. Dates of birth. That's sensitive personal information. Medical records are what? They're going to be personal health information, just as a doctor's evaluation for an injured worker is going to be personal health information. Computer passwords. Now, I put this in here because we easily forget that our computer passwords are sensitive personal information, and sometimes we have them, I don't want to say we have them stuck on our monitor, but we certainly have them in full view of somebody else. And we need to protect that just like we would protect any other sensitive personal information. And the last one I have there is criminal background checks. And criminal background checks are sensitive personal information, or SPI. You want to take 2?
I'll take 2.
Okay.
I'll take 2.
I'll take 2.
Anyway, what are some methods your manager can use to discuss ethical behavior in the workplace? Now, here in our workplaces, we care about ethics, and we want employees to be ethical in doing their jobs. And certainly, as the ethics advisor, it's part of my job to make sure that we all adhere to good ethical policies. So, what are some methods your manager can use to discuss ethical behavior in the workplace? Well, some answers that we've heard in the past is that first and foremost, your manager can be a good role model for ethical behavior. Managers have to walk the walk and talk the talk. So if you see your manager doing it, that could help you be more interested in doing it as well. Managers can share articles when they come across. When you have staff meetings, managers can share those articles in staff meetings or prior to staff meetings, and you can discuss them in your weekly or monthly staff meetings. You could invite the ethics advisor. Managers could invite the ethics advisor to come to staff meetings and talk about ethical behavior in the workplace and some of the things that are going on in the country as a whole or here at the agency. If you remember, in November of every year, we send out a gift memo. We affectionately call it the gift memo because in November and December, those 2 months where if our employees have been giving good customer service, sometimes customers will give them gift certificates or give them things for a thank you for doing good customer service, providing good customer service. And there are some things that we can accept as state employees and some things we cannot accept. And by giving the gift memo, it reminds people what we can do, what we can accept, and what we can't, and that if you have any questions, you can always contact me as the ethics advisor here at the agency. So these are some examples of what managers can do in order to remind the employees who report to them that we want to remain above board with regard to ethics here at the agency, and we want to do what we need to do in order to help taxpayers believe that they can trust us when it comes to ethics with regard to what we do as state employees. Question number 3. If an employee wants to report internal fraud, waste, or abuse, the employee can report it too. Now, if you turn on page 38 through 43 of your handout, it goes into great deal about all of the different ways you can report internal fraud, waste, or abuse. Now, we understand that when you see somebody stealing or somebody making personal copies on the copier, any kind of internal fraud, waste, or abuse, it's your personal decision to report it. And we want you to. But since it is a personal decision, we want to make sure that you have all of the different ways that you can report it. As you see, A is internal audit, B is the fraud unit, C is the fraud prevention panel, D is the state auditor's office, and the one that I left off is the fraud hotline. There's an actual toll-free telephone number located on pages 40 and 41 of your handout. It's an 888 toll-free number where if you see internal fraud, waste, or abuse happening and you don't want to let people know who you are in reporting it, you can anonymously report it by calling that number. In addition to, as I mentioned on pages 38 through 43, they go into great detail about all 5 of those different ways you can report internal fraud, waste, or abuse. Again, it's a personal decision to report it if you see it, and we want you to, and so we want to make sure that you have all of the different ways that you can do just that.
One thing that I appreciated about the new ethics policy and the latest revision of the personnel manual is they define fraud, waste, and abuse. People sometimes say, well, what is abuse of, how can I abuse state equipment?
Yeah.
Or what is fraud? I might know what fraud is, but what is waste and abuse and in the workplace? And I really appreciated that because it gave me, I was like, oh, okay, I get that.
Yeah.
So I have number 4. So as it pertains to our ethics policy, which we've been talking about, what is meant by the appearance of impropriety? That's been in our policy for many, many years. So what does it mean if you were a new employee and you were reading the fraud policy or our ethics policy and you said, what does it mean here when it says appearance of impropriety? Those are kind of big words, and I don't understand that. Well, it's if an activity or event is perceived as improper, or what would be another term for improper? If it's questionable, then don't do it. If I know that particularly in a lot of the news today, people will say, well, it's not illegal. Well, just because it's not illegal doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. So that's one of the things that this agency has always had the really high standard of appearance of impropriety.
Right. If something looks to be improper, it is improper, therefore don't do it. Because you'd never be able to explain it away. And especially as state employees, we'd never be able to explain it well enough for people to say, oh, okay, I understand what you meant. If something looks to be improper, it is improper, therefore don't do it.
So you want to take the last one?
I'll take the last one, and this last one is purposely the last one because we've been talking about policies and procedures. But we started off saying that this class is about building a respectful workplace. Because, as I said at the very beginning, if you respect your coworkers, if your coworkers respect you, then you probably aren't going to harass them or discriminate against them or retaliate against them. So we've been talking about policies and things like that, things that your coworkers can do that would be inappropriate. But now, as the last question asks, describe characteristics of a person that you would like to work with. Sure enough, we don't want to work with people who harass us or discriminate against us, but what are some characteristics of a coworker that you would like to work with? Well, if you've given it a little bit of thought since you were doing the quiz before we started talking, you probably came up with someone who's funny, somebody who keeps the atmosphere light, somebody who won't say that's not my job, somebody who will always pitch in and help, somebody who will always try to make things better for everybody else. No matter how much is on their plate, they will always find time to help other people. Those are characteristics of what you would like to see in a coworker or a colleague. Now, if we have done this class, they've actually talked about other things that they would prefer not to see in a colleague or coworker, and all of these are true.
I can't believe you're going to cover that.
I'm going to cover this because this is necessary. This is true. We've heard people say, "Well, I want to work with somebody who will wash their hands when they go to the restroom," because that's very important. If you see a coworker or a colleague not washing their hands, you don't want to shake hands with them. So you want to see a colleague or a coworker who will wash their hands. As a matter of fact, potluck tasting, you want to see somebody who will use utensils to taste things in the potluck line. Now, y'all have seen people who will stick their hand and their finger and stuff. So you do not want a coworker who will use their finger. You want coworkers who will use the utensils. Candy dishes. Instead of having colleagues who will only just take candy, it was reported that they want coworkers who will bring candy from time to time.
The first of the month.
The first of the month, right after you get paid. So these are all examples of things that you would like to see in a colleague and things you would not like to see in a colleague, because again, if we could keep it light, if we can always talk about respect in the workplace, then we don't have to talk about the heavy-duty stuff of discrimination and sexual harassment and retaliation in the workplace. And certainly as the employee ombudsman here at the agency, that's what I always strive to do. If we can kind of keep things light, if we can be patient with others, just like we would want them to be with us, then we don't have to deal with the heavy-duty stuff. And that's a good place to be in a workplace. Don't you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to thank you for being here with us today. If you turn over to the next page, you will see that list of sensitive personal information and personal health personal health information. The rest of the handout is policy. And we put it in your handout so that you know where it is, so you're able to read it, so that you can refresh yourself about what it says. And just about every 2 years they revise the policy, so things change a bit. We like to bring your attention to those changes when we're teaching, but there'll be some things that will be of interest to you at some time, and you just need to find it in the policy. So you know that it's online, but if it relates to your rights, discrimination, sexual harassment, fraud, waste, and abuse, it's here in your handout. Now, the last 2 pages of your handout are, if you're looking at this online and you're working with OIC or TDI, you'll see different ones for different agencies. You're going to have an acknowledgement form. And this acknowledgement form just says, Vivian, I swear I watched this video with you and Curtis, and you put your name on it and your date on it, and you can send this. If you work for TDI, you can send this to me or someone in HR. If you'll send it to Human Resources mailbox, I will get it, or you can send it to me. If you work for OIC, there is one with the OIC logo on it on the website. So you will complete that and you will send it to Employee Relations at OIC. If you would like to, then I would like for you to fill out the evaluation form and let me and Curtis know what you thought of the course. Now, as you know, we revise the course, we redesign a course every 2 years. And so we're always interested, particularly with people that have to watch a video, what else did you need on the video? What would you have preferred on the video? Is there some other way that we could convey the information that would have been helpful to you? So those are the things, those are my wishes. The acknowledgement form is a must because we're audited. Make sure that acknowledgement form is in your personnel file. The evaluation form is cherry on top for me, if you can get that to me. So either way you look at it, we will get these forms, and if you work for OIC and you send it to me, I'll still get it to OIC. Okay? Anything you want to say as closing?
Thank you for watching the video. Some of you had to watch it. So it's mandatory, but we hope that you had a good time. And if there are any questions that you have, feel free to contact Vivian and HR at TDI, or me as the Employee Ombudsman and Ethics Advisor at TDI. Thank you and have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you. Texas Roadhouse wouldn't hire older workers for the front of the house positions.